After 8 years of growing my parents' small shop into a national brand, I landed a $8 million investment. A tea, the family celebration. Mom squeezed my hand and whispered, "Your brother will make a better CEO, dear." I kept my composure. On Monday, I made them regret. To Sinclair Fine Foods in our exciting new chapter. The crystal glasses clinked around the private dining room at Ellsworth, Boston's most exclusive restaurant. I smiled as Edward Kingston, lead investor at Meridian Capital, raised his glass with genuine enthusiasm. After months of negotiations, I'd finally secured an $8 million investment to take my family's specialty food business national. The champagne was flowing, the investors were beaming, and my parents looked happier than I'd seen them in years. My name is Madison Sinclair. 8 years ago, I walked away from a promising finance career to save my parents' struggling gourmet shop. Everyone thought I was crazy to leave my 6-figure salary for a family business that was 3 months from bankruptcy, but I saw potential where others saw only risk. "I remember when your parents' shop was just that little storefront in Cambridge," said Vivian, my former business school professor, who had introduced me to the investors. "And now look at this: national distribution, an online subscription model, and those manufacturing partnerships. Remarkable transformation, Madison." I felt a glow of pride as the investors nodded appreciatively. The journey hadn't been easy. I'd restructured operations, rebranded our product line, secured strategic partnerships, and built an e-commerce platform from scratch. Sinclair Fine Foods had grown from a beloved local shop to a budding national brand, with our specialty jams and artisanal condiments now shipping to 48 states. "None of this would have happened without Madison's vision," my father said, raising his glass. "When Helen and I started this business 25 years ago, we never imagined it could become what it is today." My mother nodded and smiled, but something flickered across her face, a hesitation I recognized all too well. As the investors discussed expansion plans that I'd meticulously prepared, I felt my mother's hand slip into mine under the table. "Madison, dear," she whispered, leaning close enough that her perfume enveloped me. "This is all very exciting. But remember, when William returns from his program next month, he'll make a better CEO for the family business. You've done wonderful groundwork, but he has the right education for this scale." My brother William, the golden child who'd been traveling through Europe for the past year after getting his MBA, barely checking in on the family business I'd been rebuilding with my blood, sweat, and tears. I kept my smile firmly in place as I squeezed my mother's hand back, but ice was forming in my stomach. 8 years of 18-hour days, skipped vacations, and postponed personal life, and she still saw me as the temporary caretaker of William's birthright. "Everything okay?" Kingston asked, noticing our exchange. "Absolutely perfect," I replied, raising my glass higher. But behind my smile, gears were already turning. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. 8 years ago, I'd been the rising star at Morgan Stanley when my father called with news that changed everything. The family business was failing. They'd overextended with a second location, and the recession had hit their luxury food items hard. They were 3 months from closing their doors permanently. I still remember my colleagues' reactions when I resigned. "You're leaving finance to sell fancy jam?" my boss had asked incredulously. Even William, then finishing his undergraduate degree, had questioned my decision. "It's a sinking ship, Maddie," he'd said. "Let it go and find them something else to do." But I couldn't let it go. Sinclair Fine Foods wasn't just a shop. It was my parents' legacy. I'd grown up watching them craft recipes, source ingredients from small family farms, and build personal relationships with every customer. When I walked away from my finance career, I wasn't just saving a business. I was preserving a family dream. The first 2 years were brutal. I worked the front counter during the day and pored over spreadsheets at night. I sold our second location, renegotiated supplier contracts, and modernized our accounting systems. I took out a second mortgage on my condo to fund our first e-commerce platform, then slept on a cot in the stockroom for 6 months when I couldn't make both the mortgage and rent payments. William graduated and took an entry-level position at a consulting firm. He occasionally offered advice from the sidelines, but was too busy building his own career to help with the family business. My parents never seemed to mind his absence, always quick to point out how he was gaining valuable experience that would someday benefit Sinclair Fine Foods. Meanwhile, I was transforming the business. Our handcrafted preserves caught the attention of a food blogger whose post went viral. I leveraged that exposure into a subscription box service that now had 20,000 monthly subscribers. Last year, I secured partnerships with 3 national gourmet grocery chains, increasing our revenue by 340%. Through it all, my parents remained curiously ambivalent about my contributions. They were grateful certainly, but there was always an underlying current of "this is temporary" in their praise. William would eventually take over as the firstborn and only son, an unspoken family assumption that no amount of my success seemed to change. "Madison?" Kingston's voice pulled me back to the present. The investors were looking at me expectantly. "I'm sorry," I said, composing myself. "Could you repeat that?" "I was asking about your vision for the company's leadership structure moving forward," Kingston said. "Your operational plan is excellent, but I want to make sure we're aligned on management." The question hung in the air as my mother tensed beside me. This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating for years. "The leadership structure will remain as it is currently," I said carefully, aware of my mother's eyes on me. "I'll continue as CEO with my parents serving as brand ambassadors and advisors to preserve the authentic family story that our customers connect with." Kingston nodded, jotting something in his notebook. "And what about your brother? Helen mentioned he's finishing an MBA program." Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "William has just completed his executive MBA at Wharton. He'll be joining the leadership team next month, bringing valuable perspectives from his consulting experience." I kept my expression neutral despite the familiar sting. William had spent exactly 3 weekends at the shop in the past 8 years, yet my mother spoke as if he'd been integral to our growth all along. Kingston's gaze shifted between my mother and me, clearly sensing the tension. "I see. And what will his role be?" "We haven't finalized that yet," I said quickly. "We're focusing on closing this investment round first." But my mother wasn't finished. "William has always had the strongest head for business in the family," she continued proudly. "Madison has done wonderfully with the creative aspects, but William understands the financial side in a way that will be crucial for this expansion." I nearly choked on my drink. I'd been a financial analyst before joining the family business, had restructured our entire operation, and had just secured an $8 million investment that William knew nothing about. Yet somehow, in my mother's mind, he was the business expert. I noticed Kingston exchange a glance with Diane Thomas, another key investor. Something shifted in the atmosphere. A subtle recalculation that I recognized from my years in finance. They were reassessing the deal. "Mrs. Sinclair," Kingston said carefully, "our investment is largely based on Madison's track record and vision. We'd need to discuss any significant leadership changes before finalizing the agreement." My mother looked surprised, as if it had never occurred to her that the investors might be backing me rather than the family name. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Of course, he said. "We're all on the same page here. Madison has built something remarkable, and we're just proud parents excited to have both our children involved. Nothing's set in stone." The conversation shifted to safer topics, but the damage was done. As dinner wound down, I noticed Kingston speaking quietly with his team, their expressions serious. When we said our goodbyes, his handshake was firmer than usual. "We should talk," he murmured. "First thing Monday, just you." I nodded, understanding perfectly. The investors hadn't missed my mother's meaning or the implications for their $8 million. As my parents and I rode back in the town car, they chatted excitedly about William's return, seemingly oblivious to what had just happened. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, a plan already forming in my mind. Monday was going to be interesting, very interesting indeed. I barely slept that night. By 6 a.m. Saturday, I was at my desk in the empty Sinclair Fine Foods headquarters, surrounded by spreadsheets, market analyses, and 8 years of documentation. The cleaning staff looked surprised to see me there on a weekend, but they'd grown accustomed to my unconventional hours over the years. "Miss Sinclair, everything okay?" asked Jorge, our head of maintenance who had been with us since I'd taken over. "Just preparing for a big meeting," I replied, not looking up from my laptop. "Another one? After that fancy dinner last night? You worked too hard, you know?" I smiled despite myself. "I appreciate the concern, Jorge, but this one's important. Maybe the most important meeting I've ever had." After he left, I made a call I'd been considering for months, but had held off on out of family loyalty. "Madison?" "It's 6:30 on a Saturday," came Vivian's groggy voice. My former professor and mentor had always been an early riser, but even this was pushing it. I need your advice, I said without preamble. And possibly your help. 45 minutes later, Vivian walked through the door with 2 coffees and a determined expression. After explaining the situation, she sat back and studied me carefully. You've been anticipating this moment for years, she observed. What do you really want, Madison? The question hung in the air as I considered my answer. What did I want? Recognition from my parents? The CEO position I'd already been performing? Or something else entirely? I want what I've earned, I said finally. And I want to stop pretending that my family values my contribution. Vivian nodded. Then let's make some calls. By noon, I'd spoken with Kingston and arranged an emergency meeting with the investment team for Sunday morning. I'd also called my loyal employees, Daphne from marketing, Jason from operations, and Tamara from product development, asking them to come in for an urgent strategy session. These were people who had been with me from the beginning, who had built this company alongside me while William was off finding himself before his MBA. My parents called twice wanting to discuss exciting ideas William had shared for the business. I let the calls go to voicemail. This weekend wasn't about William or my parents. It was about securing my future with or without Sinclair Fine Foods. Sunday morning arrived with a knot in my stomach. I'd barely slept, running financial projections until 3 a.m. Kingston and his team arrived at 9 sharp, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. Madison, Kingston began as they settled into our conference room. I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've learned to trust my instincts. Something happened at that dinner that concerns me. You're right to be concerned, I said, sliding folders across the table to each of them. Page 1 is the current organizational chart of Sinclair Fine Foods. Page 2 is what I suspect it will look like if my parents have their way after the investment closes. The second chart showed William as CEO with me shifted to a vague creative director role with no real authority. Kingston frowned. This wasn't what we discussed during our negotiations. No, I agreed, it wasn't. But it's been the unspoken plan in my family since I joined the business. No matter what I achieve, William is the presumed heir to the company. And what's on page 3? Asked Diane Thomas, flipping forward in her folder. I took a deep breath. That's my counterproposal. The room went quiet as the investors reviewed the document. It outlined a new company structure, one that didn't include my parents or the Sinclair name at all. This is unexpected, Kingston said finally. You're proposing we redirect our investment to a new entity that you would lead? Yes, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. Let me show you why that makes financial sense for everyone involved. The market validation already exists, I explained, clicking through a presentation I'd prepared overnight. Our customer base doesn't primarily connect with the Sinclair name. They connect with our product quality and brand story, both of which I created. The investors listened intently as I detailed how our sales had grown. I showed them customer surveys where the attributes most associated with our brand, innovation, sustainability, and community connection, were all initiatives I had spearheaded, not legacy elements from my parents' original business. What about the manufacturing relationships? Asked Thomas. Wouldn't you be starting from zero? I shook my head. Our 3 main manufacturing partners have contracts with renewal provisions coming up next quarter. I've maintained those relationships personally for years. They know who really runs this business. As the meeting progressed, I laid out a complete business plan for a new company. One that would leverage everything I'd built at Sinclair Fine Foods, but without the family complications. This is impressive work for one weekend, Kingston remarked. But I'm guessing you've been thinking about this for much longer. I nodded. It's been my contingency plan for about 3 years. I've watched how my parents treat William versus how they treat me. I knew this day might come. After 2 hours of discussion, Kingston leaned back in his chair. We invested in you, Madison, not just the company. The Sinclair brand has value certainly, but you're the visionary who transformed it. He exchanged glances with his team. We need to conduct proper due diligence on this new approach, but I'm inclined to redirect our investment as you've proposed with some modifications to protect all parties. Relief washed over me. Thank you. I was prepared to walk away with nothing if necessary. That wouldn't serve anyone's interest, Kingston replied, least of all ours. But I have one condition. You need to have an honest conversation with your parents before we finalize anything. Give them a chance to recognize what they're about to lose. I wanted to refuse to spare myself the inevitable pain of that confrontation, but I knew he was right. I'll speak with them tonight. After the investors left, I met with my core team, the people who had helped build the company alongside me. I hadn't told them about my contingency plan before, unsure if they would see it as disloyalty to the family business. I always wondered if you had an exit strategy, Daphne said after I explained the situation. The way your parents talk about William, it was only a matter of time. Jason nodded. We've worked with you for years, Madison, not with the Sinclair name. Are you saying you'd come with me? I asked, surprised by their immediate support. In a heartbeat, Tamara replied. We've already discussed it, actually. We figured this day might come, especially with William finishing his MBA. The knowledge that my team had anticipated this scenario and had already decided to follow me gave me the final boost of confidence I needed. They weren't just employees. They were allies who recognized my value even when my family didn't. That evening, I drove to my parents' house with a strange sense of calm. For years I'd been fighting for recognition, trying to prove my worth through dedication and results. But now I understood. No amount of success would ever change how they saw me. William would always be their chosen successor, regardless of his minimal contribution or my proven track record. As I pulled into their driveway, my phone rang. It was William calling from the airport. Hey Maddie, he said cheerfully. Just landed. Mom said something about a big investment. Sounds like the timing of my return couldn't be better. I smiled to myself. The timing is perfect, I agreed. I'll see you tomorrow at the office. Tomorrow, Monday, when everything would change. The Sunday evening conversation with my parents went exactly as I'd expected. My mother was shocked that I would even consider abandoning the family legacy. My father, always the peacemaker, tried to suggest a compromise where William and I could co-lead the company. I've been running this business alone for 8 years, I reminded them. Why would I need a CEO leader now just as we're about to expand? William brings fresh perspectives, my mother insisted, and he's always had the strongest business mind in the family. Based on what evidence? I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. His consulting job that he quit after 2 years, his MBA that I paid for while reinvesting my salary into saving our company. My father looked pained. Madison, please understand. This was always the plan. William is the firstborn. I'm 37 years old, I interrupted. I've increased company revenue by 3,000% since taking over. I secured an $8 million investment based on my vision and execution. But none of that matters because William was born first, because he's your son and not your daughter. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. They had no defense except tradition and preference. The investors are backing me, not the family name, I said finally. You have until tomorrow morning to decide if you want to recognize that reality or lose everything I've built. I left them stunned in their living room. A family photo from my childhood staring down at us from above the fireplace. William front and center, me slightly off to the side. It had always been that way, I realized. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. I'd arranged for the investors to meet me at the office at 9 a.m., knowing that my parents typically arrived at 8:30, and William had texted that he would join for his first day at 8:45. I arrived at 7:30, giving myself time to center my thoughts and prepare for what was coming. To my surprise, Daphne, Jason, and Tamara were already there, along with about a dozen other key employees. What are you all doing here so early? I asked. Daphne smiled. We wanted you to know you're not alone in this. Whatever happens today, we're with you. The gesture nearly broke my composure, but I managed a grateful nod before retreating to my office to review my notes one final time. At 8:30 sharp, my parents walked in, their expressions tense but determined. My mother was dressed formally as if for an important presentation. My father looked tired, the argument from last night clearly weighing on him. At 8:42, William strolled in, wearing an expensive suit and exuding the casual confidence of someone who has never had to fight for recognition. He greeted employees he barely knew with handshakes and declarations of how excited he was to take the helm of the family business. I watched from my glass-walled office as he worked the room, already playing the role of CEO without having earned a single moment of it. My mother beamed with pride, pointing out various aspects of the operation to him as if he were a visiting dignitary, rather than someone who should have been in the trenches with us for the past 8 years. At precisely 9 a.m., the elevator doors opened, and Kingston walked in with his investment team and 2 people I recognized as partners from Meridian Capital's legal department. The atmosphere in the office immediately shifted, employees sensing that something significant was about to happen. My mother hurried over, extending her hand. "Mr. Kingston, we're so delighted you're here. I'd like to introduce you to my son, William." "He's just returned from Kingston," interrupted her politely but firmly. "Actually, Mrs. Sinclair, we're here to speak with Madison, though I think it would be beneficial for all of you to join us in the conference room." The moment of reckoning had arrived. The conference room felt charged with tension as everyone took their seats. My parents and William on one side, the investment team on the other, with me at the head of the table. Years of unspoken family dynamics were about to collide with cold business reality. Kingston opened his briefcase and laid out several documents. "Before we begin, I want to clarify something important. Meridian Capital's investment was approved based on Madison's leadership and vision for this company. Our due diligence focused on her track record, her team, and her growth strategy." William shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My mother's smile became fixed. "Since Friday evening's conversation," Kingston continued, "we've had to reassess our position. It's become clear that there may be some discrepancy in expectations regarding the company's future leadership." My father cleared his throat. "We've always envisioned Sinclair Fine Foods as a true family business, with both our children contributing their unique strengths." "With all due respect, Mr. Sinclair," Diane Thomas interjected, "our investment was predicated on continuity of leadership. Madison has demonstrated exceptional business acumen, growing this company from near bankruptcy to a national contender. Any significant change to that leadership represents a material alteration to our agreement." William leaned forward, the confidence in his voice belying his complete lack of involvement in the company for the past 8 years. "I can assure you that my executive MBA and consulting experience make me well qualified to what?" Kingston asked bluntly. "To replace the person who saved this company, who increased its valuation by 3,000%, who secured this investment in the first place." The room fell silent. My mother's face had gone pale, her eyes darting between William and Kingston. "We have a proposition," Kingston announced, sliding a folder toward my parents. "2 options, actually. I suggest you review them carefully." My parents opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were 2 legal documents. The first outlined the original investment deal, but with explicit language ensuring I would remain CEO for a minimum of 5 years, with William limited to a non-executive role. The second document was something else entirely, a term sheet for a $10 million investment in a new company, one that would be founded and led by me, with no connection to the Sinclair name or family ownership. "What is this?" my father asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Insurance," I replied calmly. "In case you still don't understand what's actually valuable about this company." William snatched the second document, his face flushing as he scanned its contents. "You're threatening to start a competing business? Your own family?" "I'm protecting the value I've created," I corrected him. "Value that you had no part in building, William. Where were you when I was sleeping on a cot in the stockroom to make payroll? When I was personally delivering orders because we couldn't afford shipping fees? When I was redesigning our entire product line while working the register?" My mother looked stricken. "Madison, you can't possibly mean to abandon your family legacy." Before I could respond, the conference room door opened. Daphne entered, followed by Jason, Tamara, and at least 15 other employees, many who had been with the company for years. "Excuse the interruption," Daphne said, her voice clear and confident. "But we wanted to make something known. If Madison leaves to start a new company, we go with her. All of us." The room erupted in whispers. My parents stared in disbelief at the assembled employees, the beating heart of the company they thought they controlled. "The choice is yours," I said quietly. "Recognize what I've built and who built it, or watch me walk away with everything that makes this company valuable." For nearly 10 minutes, the only sound in the conference room was the shuffling of papers as my parents and William examined the documents before them. Kingston and his team waited patiently. The employees who had come to stand with me remained at the edges of the room, a visual reminder of where the company's true value resided. Finally, my father sighed deeply and pushed the first document forward. "We'll sign this one," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Madison stays as CEO." My mother's lips were pressed into a thin line, but she nodded in agreement. William looked shell-shocked, his carefully constructed future crumbling before his eyes. "A wise choice," Kingston said, signaling for his legal team to finalize the paperwork. 2 hours later, it was done. The investment would proceed with explicit protections from my position. William would join the company as Vice President of Business Development, a role with clear boundaries and a reporting structure that positioned him under me. My parents would transition to brand ambassadors, stepping back from day-to-day operations entirely. That was 6 months ago. Today, Sinclair Fine Foods is thriving. Our national expansion is ahead of schedule, and our new product lines have exceeded sales projections by 40%. From the outside, we look like a heartwarming success story of family entrepreneurship. The reality is more complicated. I maintain a strictly professional relationship with my parents and William. Our interactions are cordial but limited to business matters. I attend the mandatory family dinners on holidays, but I no longer seek their approval or recognition. Some wounds don't heal. They just become part of who you are. The betrayal taught me something valuable. My worth isn't determined by my family's recognition of it. My true family is the team that stood behind me that Monday morning, ready to walk away from security for the sake of loyalty and fairness. I may carry the Sinclair name on my business cards, but my real legacy is entirely my own.